Hello everyone. This tutorial will be explaining how to reference in the research project. You're going to need to learn how to reference and so you can use it in your research outcome. Particularly if you're doing a written research outcome, there are lots of things you need to know about referencing, but also if you're doing a spoken research outcome, you'll also need to reference everything that you've used. So what is referencing? It means acknowledging where you have got your information and ideas from. And if you reference, then you will never be accused of plagiarism. And plagiarism is just presenting someone else's ideas or works as if they are your own. So it's really important that you acknowledge where your information and your ideas have come from. In the research project, your referencing demonstrates synthesis and substantiation, and synthesis and substantiation are two key areas that you are assessed on in your research outcome. So synthesis means bringing together all the different parts of your research into this new thing which you're creating, which is your research outcome. So you might have got interviews, you might have got journal articles, you might have got information from all these different places, and you're going to bring it together into this one thing, which could be a written report or a PowerPoint or a video or whatever it is you've chosen to do. Substantiation means you are proving that what you're saying in your research outcome is backed up by sources. It's not stuff that you've just made up out of your head, that what you're saying is based on evidence and proof. And for synthesis and substantiation, the way you demonstrate that is through your referencing. So that's why we spend a bit of time teaching you how to do it. Okay, so there are two main rules for referencing. So the first rule is that a reference must be included every time you use someone else's ideas or information. So that means if you paraphrase someone else's words, which means expressing someone else's ideas in your own words, just because you change it around into your own language doesn't make it yours, you still have to reference. Summarising, if you've read a whole large paragraph and you cut it right back to like one or two sentences, you still need to reference, even though it might be in your own words, it's not your original thinking. Definitely if you're using an exact quote, you need to reference, and also if you are copying. So that means if you are reproducing a diagram or a graph or a table and images as well, everything that comes from somewhere else you have to reference. Unless it's your own original photograph, then you don't. Okay, so rule number 2 is each reference must appear in two places. The first place it appears is in the text, that means in the flow of your writing, or if you're doing an oral presentation, in the flow of your speaking. And the second place it appears is in the reference list, and that is at the end of your PowerPoint or at the end of your piece of writing. So we're going to deal with these one at a time. So the in-text reference is placed either before or after the quote or idea you're using, and it consists of 2 or 3 things. The first thing that's in the in-text reference is the author or family or the editor's surname, the family name. Sometimes there is no author. So if you're looking at a website, for example, and you've looked everywhere on that homepage and you can't find an author's name or an editor's name, you might have to use the organisation as the author. So for example, it might be a document from a government website. You're not going to find someone's name attached to that. So the organisation will become the government department. The second thing that you have to put in the in-text reference is the year of publication. It's only the year, it's not the day or the date, or sorry, the day or the month, it's just the year. And finally, if you have, if you're looking at a magazine or you're looking at a book, you're also going to have to put the page number in. So every source is going to have 2 bits of information: the author's or the organisation's name, family name, and the year of publication. And if it's a print text, you're also going to have the page. Okay, so here's an example of in-text referencing. So I've paraphrased an idea here. It says many factors are known to affect the successful outcomes for students at secondary school. So that's the information I have used from another source. Immediately after that, what I have here is I have my in-text reference, and I've got bracket Johnson, that is his last name. Can you notice that we don't have a first initial, it's just his last name, comma, 2003, that's the date of publication, another comma, then we have a lowercase p dot 37, bracket, full stop. So the things to note about that is every bit of information is divided by a comma, and then after the final bracket we have the full stop. What students often do is they put the full stop after the last word in the sentence, which is incorrect. You need to make sure that the full stop happens after the final bracket. That in-text reference is part of the sentence. The other way you could do the in-text reference is you could incorporate the author's surname into the flow of the sentence. So here we have the word Johnson, which is his surname, as part of the sentence, and we only have the year of publication and the page number which are appearing in the in-text reference. So it's a really good idea to mix it up. Sometimes you could use the surname in the in-text reference, and sometimes you could use the surname in the flow of the sentence. Here's another example of an in-text reference with a direct quote. So once again, we've got the two ways here. We've got the surname of the person who had the original source. So we've got his surname in the flow of the sentence. Then we have, in the bracket, we just have the year of publication and the page number. When you do a direct quote, can you see how we only have a single quote mark, not the double quotes? In the second example here, we have the quote, and then we have, in the in-text reference, we have the surname, the year of publication, and the page number, and we have the full stop happening after the in-text reference. Okay, the second place that the reference appears is in the reference list, and the reference list appears at the end. So if you're doing a PowerPoint, it's going to be the very last slide. If you're doing a written research outcome, it's the last thing at the end of your research project outcome. So here we have the rules for a reference list. It's arranged alphabetically by the author's family name. It's a single list, and so you would not divide it up into subheadings. You wouldn't have books in one subsection and then website in another section. It's one complete list, all organised together in alphabetical order. In the reference list, you have to put the full details of all the sources you used. So in the in-text reference, it's just like a little mini version, but in the reference list, it's everything, the author, date, title, and all the publishing details. And the thing to remember here is it can get quite complicated, but the general rule is everything is divided by a comma, full stop at the end, and the name of the book or the magazine is placed in italics. All right, so here's an example. So you can see in this example we have three authors, Daly, J, Speedy, S, and Jackson, D. All right, so it's okay to put the shorthand abbreviated and there. And can you see that in the reference list you would put their surname followed by their first initial. In the in-text reference, it's simply just their surname, no initial at all. Then we have the year of publication followed by a comma, the title of the book in italics, the publisher, and the place of publication. The place of publication can be a city or it can be a country. Here we have a website. So lots of students just think they can just put a URL as the website reference, and that is incorrect. You have to look for an author. Remember, if there's no author, you're looking for an organisation. So in this case, we have an author. We've got Thomas, S, that's his first initial. We have the year of publication of that website, so go and find the year it was last updated. We've got the title of the web page in italics. If there is an organisation, in this case there was, Adelaide University, you could put that down. Otherwise, if there's no organisation, just leave it out. You have to put the date that you first viewed it. If you're not sure, you can just approximate a date that you first looked at that website. And then you have the actual URL, and you can see at the beginning and the end of that URL, you've got the those two little symbols there which enclose the URL, and at the end of that you have a full stop. Here we have a journal or a magazine article. Once again, we've got the person who wrote the article and their initials. In this case, MJ would be like a double-barreled first name perhaps. We've got the year that it was published. We've got the name of the article and then the actual name of the journal that it comes from or the magazine it comes from, and that goes in italics. Every magazine has some sort of serial number, like it could be the magazine published twice a year, or it could be 4 times a year. You need to look at the front page of that magazine and work out its publication series and then add it in here. In this case, it was volume 41, number 11. Here we have the page number. If it's a single page, it's just P. If it's a page range, like I have here, it's PP dot. So just be careful how you put your page in, and at the end you always put a full stop. All right, so we have some frequently asked questions here. So do in-text references count to the word count or add to the word count? And the answer just generally is no. Anything in the bracket does not count. But you need to be careful here, because for some of you, your word count is going to be really important. Some of you are going to want to write a lot, and you have to keep to the word count, which for your research outcome, if it's written for RPB, the word count is 2,000 words. So we have, in the first example here, McLean is outside the bracket. So that is going to count. That's the author's surname outside the bracket, which will count towards your word count. In the second example, here we have the word McLean, his surname is occurring in the bracket. So in this case, it doesn't count towards the word count. So if you're really desperate to cut your word count back, you should do the second option there and make sure the author's surname is occurring in the word count, in the brackets. What if the information source does not have an author or a date? Okay, so if there's no author, then you should look for an organisation or a sponsoring body. So it could be, like we said before, a government department, or it could be any other sort of organisation. Like, for example, a business name is an organisation. So if you're looking at a Bunnings site, for example, there won't be a name, a personal name, but the organisation, or Bunnings in this case, is going to become the organisation, and that goes in as the author. Sometimes there's no author and there is no organisation, and if you still think that it's really good information, then the title of the document becomes the author. If there's no date, you've looked everywhere, you can't find a date, then you simply put N.D. and that means no date. You don't leave nothing, you have to put that in, otherwise the person marking your work is going to think you just have forgotten to do it. All right, so here's an example of a journal article that has no author. It also has no organisation. All right, so in this case we have put the name of the source as the author. So such a strategy is already in use. There's my thing I'm going to reference, and my reference is building human resources instead of landfills. And there's the year it was published is the year 2000. All right, so there was no author, no organisation, so the title of the source becomes what I reference. In the reference list for that example, the title of the source is the first thing that's going to appear in the reference list. What do I do if there's a really long quote? Well, all I can say is your word limit is very definite. You've only got 2,000 words. If you're going to put a really long quote in, you have to be really 100% sure that every bit of that quote is important. Otherwise, you're using lots of words for no reason. But if you are definitely going to use a quote, this is what you need to do. A long quote is more than 30 words. You indent, you move everything over. You don't use quotation marks, and you use a smaller size font. And here's an example. All right, so you can see I've moved everything over to the right. I've used a smaller size font, and I've got the reference there at the end. Those 3 little dots in the middle are really handy. They are called ellipses, and if you've got a quote, but in the middle of that quote you've got some stuff that's not very important, you can take it out and replace it with those 3 dots. It's a really good way to save your word count. When you reference conversations, interviews, letters or emails, these are generally known as personal communications. The in-text reference includes the date that the communication occurred and the name of the person you communicated with. That's if you haven't already used it in the flow of the sentence. So here's lots of examples that have come from the SACEBORD website, okay, and you can read through those and you can see that the person's name that's been interviewed either comes in the flow of the sentence, and then in the brackets you just put the date of when the interview occurred, In the last example there, you can see that the person who was interviewed is also, the surname of that person is in the bracket instead of being in the flow of the sentence.